Welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. Today, I am thrilled to announce that we are holding a live stream panel discussion about this beautiful, gorgeous book. I just cannot say enough good things. I was really excited when it arrived in the mail. I was like, oh, it feels like a really good book, and it looked like a really good book, and it read like a really good book. So, more good things here in just a moment. But this is a panel discussion, not just me monologuing. Before we get to our guest, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, the Logres Institute for Classical Liberal Studies. The Logres Institute is a new project of the Ciceronian Society dedicated to helping teachers in the classical renewal movement get the education their colleges should have provided. Through classes organized in 5 certificate pathways, the Logres Institute connects teachers with knowledgeable professors who lead class using a seminar-style pedagogy. If you've ever found yourself thinking, how can I get the classical education I never received? Or where could I study the things that I need to teach next year with other adults and not go back to graduate school? Then definitely check out what Logres is offering. You can find all the details in our show notes, once those exist, because they don't right now, it's a live stream, or over at logresinstitute.org. And now, we're going to get into our regularly scheduled live stream discussion. Let me start with asking our panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us everything that our audience needs to know. Junius, start us off. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you do? All the things.
I'm Junius Johnson. I'm here because I couldn't find my way into any of the parallel universes, so I'm stuck in this one. But if anyone has any sort of, science fiction-y devices out there that can get me home, I'd be great to talk with you about that. I'm a scholar of medieval tradition. My PhD is in medieval philosophical theology from Yale University. I also have an MPhil in medieval vernacular literature with a focus on Old French and medieval Italian literature, and that includes the Arthurian cycle and the Vulgate version of it. I teach courses online and as independent scholar, sort of traveling around as a scholar for hire, which basically means you can hire me on the dark web to slay ignorance, and I will take that out for you. And that's who I am.
Fantastic. Annie?
I am Annie Crawford, a classical educator and cultural apologist, which means I teach great books courses for home-based high schoolers. And as a cultural apologist, I speak and write on issues of faith and culture. And I will mention, don't forget to read the appendices to this book. And in the appendices, particularly the one about the wasteland, Malcolm Guite actually gives a very good mini essay on what cultural apologetics is, learning how to see that all truth is God's truth and all stories are pointing toward that great story. So that's a little bit about me and how I'm connected to this book.
Oh, fantastic. Josh Fullman, take it away. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Josh Fullman. I'm an associate professor of humanities at Pepperdine University. I've got a master's in medieval studies from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD in English from Southern Illinois University, where I did my dissertation on medieval apocalypticism. I'm currently researching Shakespeare's medieval continuities, and I got invited to this because Josh happens to be one of my former students. He and I were in an Arthuriana seminar together, where the esteemed Dr. Ben Lockard and I had the privilege of teaching a number of eager young Arthurian students. And we did Arthuriana medieval to modern. It was a great seminar. So that's how I found my way here.
Fantastic. And Matt Wheeler.
Well, let's see how to answer the question, who are you? So my name is Matt Wheeler, and I'm a singer and a songwriter, which you might call a singer-songwriter. And I specialize in songs based on classic works of literature. Not yet this book, Galahad and the Grail, yet. My next project, I'm planning to be a suite of songs based on the Chronicles of Narnia. But I do already have, Lewis, Tolkien, and Barrie-inspired songs. Wendell Berry and Lewis are my 2 favorite authors. And also, besides all those things, I'm a higher ed professional and professor here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which I realized I didn't say where I was, and husband of almost 20 years and father of a very cheerful autistic son named Luke. And that's a little bit about me. Oh, and Josh Herring and I met for the first time at the Mere Christians conference in Florida. Our mutual friend Andrew Lazo's conference, who we both know through the Pints with Jack podcast. Also, if you know the podcast Pints with Jack, I wrote the theme.
Very cool.
I'm going to resist the temptation to ask you to go ahead and just sing it for us here. We won't steal the Pints with Jack vibe. But now our not terribly surprised, but our very exciting surprise guest, Reverend Dr. Malcolm Guite, who, if I get this correctly, I believe the best nickname I've heard for you is the Last Living Hobbit. Please
Right.
do introduce yourself. Say anything you want to,
Yeah,
want us to know.
I should introduce myself by partly saying I'm not sure I should be here. When I saw this was on, I was very happy that it was going on, and I was glad to think there's going to be a discussion, and obviously between the discussion between people who are very well qualified in their different ways to discuss this. It wasn't just going to be a random set of Amazon reviews. So I thought that was good. And at first I thought really perhaps I shouldn't be here. You know, I wouldn't want to put anybody off. I'd want people to feel completely free. But on the other hand, I was also just interested. You put the text out there and you think, how is it being responded to? Obviously, I've been very encouraged by some of the early reviews. That's been great. And some of the reviewers, I think, have really got into the heart of it, certainly when it comes to kind of lifting veils and re-enchanting. So my aim in being here, partly I thought Stephen Crotts might be here as well, so we could, you know, is mainly to learn from you. I just as a kind of get-go thing, I think this is true of the shorter poems, the collection of lyric poems I've written, but I think it's probably true of this larger work, which is that I trust the story knows more than I do. And I also trust the poetry to know more than I do. I mean, Yeats, in the preface to his collected poems, asks the question, who is the poet, capital P, who speaks to you in the poem, in the first person? And Yeats says, whoever that is, it's not the bundle of incoherence that sits down to breakfast, or second breakfast in my case. In other words, the individual human person of the poet is probably as chaotic as anybody else and writes the poem in order to find out and learn from the poem things that they don't know. They don't already know stuff, and they simply instruct the poem. And that is even more true when one dealing with the great stories of mythic resonance of the kind that concern the matter of Britain. So I expect other people to discover things that are really in there that I may not have been consciously aware of, just as I myself, every time I reread any of these great stories, discover new meanings and new applications and new senses of connection. So I wouldn't want anybody to be inhibited in interpreting this poem by thinking, oh, maybe that's not what the poet meant, because I think what the poet meant may be the least interesting thing about it. You know, Socrates famously in the Apology asks the poets to explain their poems and realizes they've got no idea. So that's the first thing. I'm interested to see how the poem is really working on actual readers, as opposed to how I thought it might be working or what I thought I meant by it. Once it's in the public domain, in my view, it's like your kids having grown up and gone to university and sort of coming home with different clothes. You know, the poem is entitled entirely to a life of its own without any sort of finger-wagging parental authority from me about what it's supposed to mean or be or look like. I think it just takes on its own life. So I'm just interested to see what kind of life it's taking on with you guys. Obviously, if there are points you want to just question, you know, something, I mean, I'm happy to chip in, but only on the basis that once the poem is out there, as it is now out there, my opinion is neither more nor less valuable than any other informed readers. Anyway, so that's for what it's worth, what brings me here.
Oh, well, Malcolm,
I missed all the introductions, Josh. I know. I don't know the person. You were just speaking as I came on. You're in my lower right hand frame. I didn't catch your name, or you were. Yeah, you.
Annie Crawford, and I.
Oh right, you are. We know each other on various social media.
Yes, yes. So I did the MA program at Houston Christian and studied under Michael Ward and Holly Ordway, and that's how I was introduced to your work. So
Me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so it's the imaginative apologetics thing. Okay, that's great. I just I thought that's who you might be because I'd seen the various texts about this, but I just thought I'd double check. Okay, so that's all you need to know about.
Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're all really excited to have you join in the conversation.
Well, don't be in the least inhibited is really what I want to say.
That's perfect.
Feel free to say that bit didn't work, for example.
Well, we'll see. We'll see as we get there. Now, as a quick note before I pose the first question, these things are best as like really good running conversation. So when you have a thought, please do figure out a way to get that thought in the mix, and feel free to interrupt each other. If we ever need like conversation policing, I'll jump in and just moderate. But ideally, we can just have a conversation together about this poem. I thought it might be helpful to start with just a general, what is your experience with the Arthurian tradition? And I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and start on that one. I read a collection of children's Arthurian stories as a kid, and then my first year teaching, I got a hold of Roger Lancelin Green's copy and taught that to seventh graders, and then discovered that even in Green's version, there was way more, let's just go with Lewis's term and call it eros in there than there was in my child's version. I was like, what do I do with Lancelot and Guinevere and seventh graders? And then when I got to high school, I read Mallory and taught Mallory. And then I took Dr. Fullman's class, and that just kind of unfolded the Arthurian world to me. It's like there's a depth to this tradition. I read Stephen Lawhead and loved those books for a time. I watched through the Daily Wire's Pendragon show. So I saw this. It was just like, yes, we need a new version of this story for today. And I think Galahad and the Grail is a great beginning that kind of brings this story in a way up to where we can hear it in a way that it's hard to hear Mallory and for it to kind of make sense in a way. So that's me. Somebody else take it. What's your experience with the Arthurian tradition more broadly before we get to Galahad and the Grail?
Well, I can jump in quickly because I don't have a lot of background. I'm grieved that nobody handed me Arthurian tales as a child. No high school teacher bid me read, any of the Arthurian tales. And I think maybe I had a passing exposure of Tennyson in my college experience, but it really wasn't until I was tasked with teaching Middle Ages, the great book, an integrated humanities course in the Middle Ages. And I thought, well, I know it exists and it needs to be part of what I teach. So I picked up one of the great courses. It was actually a great course on the Arthurian Legendarium. But that means I've read more about the stories than I've actually read the stories. And I really feel that is a deep difference. It's different to have head information is way different than an experience of the story. So what I did with my students, we focused on the Green Knight. And so I've read that several times. And then it was Roger Lancelin Green's, knowing that he was a student of Lewis. I thought, you know what? Well, we'll just read these together as a way of just at least knowing the stories. And I was so thrilled to hear that, Guite, Malcolm, you said that you also found his collection to be an excellent, working together of all the stories. And so that's my primary entrance is the Green Knight and then Lancelin Green's collection, which really is.
I think you can trust Lancelin Green partly because he's close to Lewis. What he does for me is to find various pathways through the thickets of Mallory. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of doublings and reproductions and retellings and repetitions in Mallory, partly because he's translating from different sources and doesn't realize that these different sources are telling the same story. Mm-hmm. So he tells it again. It's like you end up with about 3 Grail ships instead of 1, Right. Lancelin Green is really good at getting that and going through it. So I've used him. I read Mallory. I went behind Mallory and read Chrétien, and I read the Caisse de Saint Grail was really important to me, but that's more or less in Mallory. But he doesn't use everything that's in there. But time and again, when I was trying to figure out how to make narrative sense of this. Mm-hmm. Roger Lancelin Green was the guy who'd found the solution.
Yeah. And they're splendid. And I think they're underread because, kind of like Lewis says, fairy tales are like the old furniture we put in the attic for the kids to play with. And I think
Yeah.
Lancelyn Green's treatment has been treated that way, where it's something for the kids to read. And so
Yeah.
I'm pleased to see that coherence he brought to Legendarium, put into a prose, not a prose poem, a poem that I hope adults will take
Yeah.
seriously.
Well, it's over 70 years since Green published it in 53, so it's kind of fallen out, but it should be, I think it's still in print somewhere.
Well, yeah, no, it's still a classic text. And
Up in Classics has that out in an accessible volume.
Classical educators use it a lot with their mostly middle school students.
Yeah, Junius has got it right there, of course.
Yeah, I'm teaching it this summer to middle and high school students. So yeah.
Junius, take us to how you got into Arthur. And I know you've taught Arthur pretty recently and plan to teach him again, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, I just finished a course from January to May teaching what I call the first half of the tradition, which we started with the historians and the very first mentions of the name of Arthur, and then took them up through the Vulgate cycle in the beginning of the 13th century, which is an arrival point. It's the first time you have the complete narrative together across a series of poems. And then next year, in the same time frame, starting in January, we're going to pick up with Marie de France and Sir Gawain, and then pretty quickly into Mallory, and from Mallory do Tennyson and T.H. White. So it's kind of split it into the early Welsh and French takes on the story, and then the proper British takes on the story that are more what we've come to know. It's one of those things that it almost feels like it's the wrong question to ask when I first came across it, because I honestly don't remember ever not knowing the story. In trying to reconstruct it, the earliest thing that I can for sure point to as a possible first encounter with it would have been the brief reference to it in Prince Caspian. In The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when it said that, when the Pevensies came back, it was as if King Arthur had returned to England. And I say the sooner the better. I didn't really know at that point how he could come back. It's like, well, isn't he dead? So that seems to be a non-starter. But that may have been the first time I ever heard of the story. But one of the pieces of furniture of my childhood was Disney's version of The Sword and the Stone, of the T.H. White Sword and the Stone. I watched that movie very young, fell in love with it, watched it over and over and over again, dozens of times. I have the whole thing memorized. And that was part of why I love the British Isles so much. After that, you find it all over the place. I was a really avid reader of fantasy books growing up, and they love to draw upon King Arthur topos and various characters and themes and this sort of thing. And so you're constantly getting bits of it, which are, at the time I hadn't read any Mallory, I hadn't read any of the other sources. And so I didn't know, I was aware that there was this story that was out there, but I didn't know what the canonical form of it was or where to go to find it. And then, of course, as an English major in university, I came across Gawain and the Green Knight, which blew my mind on a variety of levels, and various other more authentic Arthurian tales. But it really wasn't until I was a graduate student and studying the Old French language, when we spent a lot of time reading the Vulgate cycle, and we read the entirety of the Questus on Grail, the Quest of the Holy Grail, that I really began to get deep into the tradition. So been this lifelong moving deeper and deeper and gathering more and more sources and trying to line up what's influencing what for me.
Man, that's fantastic. Matt, how about you? What's your experience with the Arthurian tradition?
I think even less than Annie's, because my expertise tends to be in other fields. Like if you want to talk anything in Wendell Berry's fiction, I am on it and ready to go deep. Or Lewis, but and some other sources. But I was trying to think, like, when I saw your questions, like, well, I remember reading A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Looney Tunes, how they would think First Night with Richard Gere and Sean Connery way back in the day. Not canonical sources. And of course there's the ever esteemed Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which I have seen many times. Yeah. So like starting with like the parodies, and then I knew there was this bigger story there. But so I haven't read any of the canonical sources at all. So actually Galahad and the Grail was like one of the first introductions into like more about what actually there was a bunch of times I was reading the story And it's like I'd heard of a bunch of these names, didn't know how they fit together. I had no idea that Galahad was Lancelot's son, and of course he didn't either for a while. So, and by the way, Malcolm, it's good to see you again.
That's great, yeah. And
And
if I'm your first taste of this more serious tradition, I'm very happy to be the gateway drug, you know. To the
yeah, well, it's kind of like, you know, like the guys from Pints of Jack talking about how, like, basically if they're doing their job, what you're doing is checking out Lewis. Like the songs that I write, you know, based on like Tolkien's or Barry's work or others, it's like if I'm doing my job, I'm getting you interested in the original source. So I am curious to go and read some more, but also the other 3 books that you have here as well. Honestly, like I hadn't read this book when Josh first asked me about it, and I was like, let me buy it and read it. And I did. And it was delightful. And we'll get into more details of that.
So you see, this first volume is divided into 3 books. I'm following the kind of classic sort of notion of what an epic should be, that it should be 12 books, that you should begin in medias res in the midst. So each of the 4 volumes has 3 books, rather like Lord of the Rings has, you know, 3 volumes, but 2 books in each volume. So that numbering of the books is quite significant. But yeah, so there's the small matter of completing it, you know. But
well, just please don't pull a George R.R. Martin and write the 3 books and then just leave us all hanging for many years,
you know,
hoping that there'll be a last book.
So my immediate, obviously Tennyson's hugely significant to me, and he eventually makes the Idylls 12 books, although I depart from him in various ways. But poetically, my lineage goes back, as it were, via Milton to Spenser, and, you know, then back to Chaucer and the Gawain poet. So Spenser's really significant to me. And of course, his you know, the Fairy Queen is Arthurian in various respects. And he planned 12 books, and he wrote a letter to Sir Walter Raleigh explaining exactly what all the 12 books were. Then he started writing the Fairy Queen, and even at 6 books, it's still the longest poem in the English language. But I was very conscious that he got as far as 6 and had a few fragments of 7. And then he was posted back to Ireland, where he was involved in a disastrous siege and defeat, and his wife died, and he came back a broken man and died not long afterwards. So when I was getting towards the end of book 6, which is the 3rd book in volume 2, I was thinking, oh golly, you know, I have got to get, you know, got to break the Spenser curse, because I kind of grew up with Spenser. I literally chose Pembroke College Cambridge is my college, because it was Spenser's college. And then I noticed, just as I was completing books, looking at my diary, that I was due to go to Ireland, exactly like Spenser did, immediately after completing book 6. And I thought, oh, bloody hell, you know. So I actually took about 3 weeks out just to really plow on with book 7 and into book 8, just to make sure I had that. But anyway, I wasn't the victim of a terrible castle siege while I was in Belfast, fortunately.
You've broken the spell. Excellent.
Yeah. So,
I saw Junius reach for I don't know if you were reaching for a copy of Spenser, but I think the game on this show might be to name a book Junius does not have on the shelves behind him. But yeah, I don't know if any of us would win that game. I'm glad, Malcolm. I'm really glad you mentioned Spenser, because I remember the first time I read Spenser with Ben Lockhart. Actually, was I was so thrown when Prince Arthur showed up carrying the Shield of Faith, and then he was the idea of Arthur as the perfect knight in there who represents all the virtues. And I remember just trying to figure out what on earth is Spenser doing, and then it made more sense as I went on. But I just had no idea that it was so Arthurian.
No, it's kind of quite significant, and there's a bit, you know, where they're sort of reading story. They're in fairyland. They're reading stories about Arthur. I mean, it's the other person who's significant in some respects is George MacDonald, who has a kind of underlying Arthur, and obviously Fantastes. It's a really significant bit where Anodos reads about, he's basically reading Mallory, and then the book itself is used to ward off evil. And then he meets the knight with the rusted armor, who is effectively Percival. So there's lots of people who are doing creative things with this stuff. Anyway, sorry, I will retreat again and just listen to them.
Josh Fullman, catch us up on how you got into Arthur. I mean, I know you've made something of a scholarly profession out of Arthurian stuff.
I noticed the sword behind you. I'm very impressed by that.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got a 14th century Scottish claymore, and then a 18th century Highland basket hilt. So, yeah, my story was actually very similar to Junius in the sense that I grew up on, I'm probably much to Tolkien's dismay, on The Sword and the Stone, the film. I remember wearing out that VHS tape to the fact I couldn't even watch it anymore because there's so many gray lines across the screen. So I loved that. That was hugely influential in cultivating my medieval imagination. And then I had an undergraduate course, I remember, with a fantastic professor. And she introduced us to not just Arthuriana, but all sorts of medieval literature. But the texts she selected related to Arthuriana were the classics: Sir Gawain the Green Knight, the alliterative Mort Arthur, the Mort Arthur itself. And then I just started devouring everything just for fun. And so I picked up Tennyson and I got through all of Le Mort d'Arthur several times, just loving it, decided to do a master's thesis on it. But one of the things that I remember being drawn to at a young age was the notion, and I think Junius already mentioned this, about the Breton hope, right? The sort of messianic implications of Arthur's reign, that this was supposed to be the kingdom of heaven on earth.
Yeah.
And I love that. I was so moved by that imagery, and then how depressed I became when it didn't happen. But he shall come again, right? Yeah. And we're kind of looking forward to that. So in some ways, I think Camelot and Arthur and all of it is sort of a central, not the central Western myth, but definitely a central Western myth in the way in which we come to understand ourselves in the world. So that's my fascination with it.
We've collectively mentioned a lot of the sources of Arthur. I'll mention two that I don't think have yet come up. Tolkien, of course, has his poem that was published posthumously, the Fall of Arthur, and that one just is. I remember it being a beautifully. I don't want to call it despair because I don't think Tolkien ever slips into despair, but you definitely feel the tragic weight of the fact that Arthur's kingdom is crashing in that poem, and then. Lewis's That Hideous Strength is the other one that really hit me a few years ago. Once you kind of get to the point, you realize, Logres is really significant for that hideous strength, and Ransom is the Pendragon, and he just sets this up as being a continuity throughout all of English history. And just I think it's the paper I wrote for your class, Josh, that really, like, Lewis kind of takes this idea of the Arthurian community and he builds it all the way through. Okay.
You'll see that I riff on that whole Logres Britain thing from That Hideous Strength directly in the prelude. And that's a big giveaway to how I see the whole thing, that I'm trying to recover Logres in the midst of Britain. Not just on my side of the Atlantic, but yours too.
Yeah, there's that great passage when you start out in the prelude reminded me exactly of That Hideous Strength. Josh, would it be all right if I just kind of read a little bit from that?
Please do.
Because this just kind of blew me over, this taking up the tail notion. And so I'll read real briefly. As I walked out one morning, all in the soft, fine rain, it seemed as though a silver veil was shining over hill and vale, as though some lovely long-lost spell has made all new again. When you're writing poetry, like, you have to hook your readers in the first few lines, and this did it. I mean, we've got the picture of the poet, which reminded me of what we have in That Hideous Strength right at the beginning, where the narrator is talking about his sort of just descent into these concentric squares to getting to Bracton Wood and falling under this sort of mystical enchantment and falling asleep. And we get that here. And then everything being made new again, this sort of evocation of the conclusion of the book of Revelation, right? Behold, I make all things new. And so this constant pulling back the veil and seeing things as they really are is just this is it. I mean, this is we have entered into the Arthurian legend as it was designed to be, and as it's always been in every good iteration been retold to us.
And if I can jump in here, you're wanting to gather these stories into an epic. An epic begins in media res, and then also the opening lines of an epic will set the theme, right? Mm-hmm. And so you really make it clear here that so you're starting in media res by starting with Galahad rather than Arthur pulling the sword from the stone. We're going to start right in the heart of the story, because the heart of the story sets the theme of the story,
exactly,
which is our longing to find our way out of the wasteland. Because that's where we are. That's the moment into which you're writing, which is why I love the way you highlight the wasteland elements. And hopefully we'll talk more about that. But right here, you hint at that. Hey, I'm retelling this tale for a people who long to see all things made new, who long to find their way out of the wasteland. So again, just to add to what you're saying, it hooks us immediately in that giving us the grand picture for what this epic is going to do.
Yeah, Annie, I wanted to highlight that as well, because there's a sense in which, in this next stanza, it's the third stanza, and with the music came these words: poet, take up the tale, this land still keeps. In earth and water magic sleeps, the dryad sighs, the naiad weeps, but you can lift the veil. That calls to mind the episode in the wasteland when the Grail Knights come to the spring that's dried up, and they summon up the spirit of the naiad, and then she summons up the spirits of the three trees, and they're able to, for a moment, set aside the fact that the land has been wasted by the dolorous stroke in order to provide the knights with the incantations they're going to need, the tokens to make their way through the wasteland. So as soon as I read that again, having read that passage in the wasteland, it became quite clear what you're saying. Yes, so poetically, if the poet is describing the England that he's writing into in this way, then that's an implicit claim that England is the wasteland, and that there has been a dolorous stroke in our past that has taken all of that magic from us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of wielded in the Enlightenment, really. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm completely resonating with what both of you are saying there. I mean, this is all. I mean, I say not everything can be intentional, but that is very intentional for me. I also, it's a kind of slightly modest thing. I feel like quite a lot of epic begins with the poet, I think sometimes rather presumptuously, male presumption there, summoning the muse and saying, okay, come on, muse, now sing this, this, and this. And I thought that probably wasn't appropriate for our age, and certainly to my experience. So in this case, the muse summons me. And I don't say, like Milton, sing Heavenly Muse. The muse says to me, basically, pull your finger out and get on with it. Do it now, because you haven't got long to do it. And I've been wanting to do this, for several decades. And because it was so important, I was putting it off. And there just came a point where I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to have time to finish it. Again, haunted by the Spencer thing. And, so it's kind of walking out one midsummer morning and literally being given my marching orders. To which I say, yes. I say at the end of that prayer, I have taken up the tale to set it free. And I say, look, I'm only part of a tradition. Somebody else will take this up from me. But I'm implicitly also saying to the muse, as I would say to this, now if I've agreed to do this and I'm putting my neck out there, you better give me the stuff. Sort of help me out here.
Well, let's. I want to take that to. I want to follow Annie's transition there to. Let's go to sort of the theme of the wasteland. This was the passage I wanted to read. That's right before they get to the oak and ash and I'm forgetting and thorn, oak and ash and thorn. I thought there was a really interesting kind of running motif where early on Galahad he rescues a naiad And then that becomes the foundation for him calling this naiad to return to her stream and to well up again. And that then nourishes the trees, which gives the knights what they need. But there's this running theme of kind of restoration and redemption that enables further restoration and redemption. Because it's not as if like this is a one and done, we've accomplished one thing and now the whole miracle is achieved, the mystery is unraveled. Instead, it's as if each step is able to go, it lets them go one step further. And I loved how in this, I'm going to read a little bit. This is on pages 252 to 254. It's a singing dialogue that I'm not going to at all attempt to sing, but I'm just going to try and read it. That is between Galahad and the naiad. Before I read that, I just want to tell you, Malcolm, I'm currently I've just finished as of today teaching through Ovid's Metamorphoses. And I have been fascinated with the naiads and the dryads in there. And then I turn to this, and you've got a specific focus on kind of just bringing that out of the mythos. So I love that. So they're in the scene, just for anybody listening who has not yet bought this book and read it, which you should go ahead and just order the book if you're listening now. Hopefully we've all convinced you this is worth your time. They're on the edge of the way. They're a little bit into the wasteland, but they really have a long ways to go. And they've got to get these talismans they've got to get these symbols that will let them survive the next stage of the journey. But for that to happen, this empty kind of this dried up creek has to be restored. And so the naiad says this: "Alas, alas, who calls me now? Who finds my hidden nest? Who draws me from my holy well, up from my haven's depths to tell the inner hurts no man can feel that stir within my breast? How can I trust an unknown man or ever trust a knight? It was a knight who struck the blow, the dolorous stroke that brought our woe, and forced us all to flee below, laid waste our brooks and streams also, all heedless of our plight. I understand, sang Galahad, when trust has been betrayed, to trust again through grief and pain is hard for any maid. Like you, I grieve the dolorous blow, the stroke that Balin gave. My grandsire's the king he struck, our hall was ruined at the stroke. But where that fell knight rent and broke, I have been sent to save. The very sword that Balin bore, who rashly brought our loss, was given me to set us free, to break its curse and infamy, and carry as a cross. And as a token, naiad fair, of all my good intent, lend me your ear that you may hear, and hearing may relent. For once I found a naiad fair, a sister sure to you, made captive by a wizard grim, and for her sake I challenged him, and broke him by his dungeons dim, and so she found me true. And we together searched his keep, and found the golden key. She reached the source behind the source, the head of every watercourse, and so her stream ran free. Perhaps she told you of that time, perhaps she spoke my name. O tender lady, lone and sad, the one who sings is Galahad. I come in hope to make you glad, and may you always trust my word. I make no other claim." I love that passage because there's so much happening there, but I just want to point out three things. Anybody else that wants to take it, go for it. But you've got this reasonable exchange where the naiad has been abused by the same type who's now calling her for her trust. And he has to demonstrate his trust. But you've also got a Christianizing of the pagan, because the naiad who was rescued reached the source beyond the source, that she found her ultimate beginnings in the Logos himself. And now you've got Galahad using what he's previously done, his previous just actions, as a justification for why he is trustworthy. And if this is a depiction of kind of what is required for moving forward, like I love the idea that it just may be that it's possible there have been abusive spiritual leaders and bad priests and so on. But the good priests are the ones who actually do connect us back to the truth and back to the hope of restoration. And I saw hints of that in this poem. So I love that part.
Yeah. Thank you for that. This is a crucial passage for me as well. You'll understand that I've been a priest and a pastor for 30-something years, and particularly in universities and listening to things. And also I was very conscious of what happened in the Me Too movement. And I feel very empathetically for women whose trust has been abused. And I really wanted to put into words, in the voice of that naiad, that thing, how can I trust an unknown man or ever trust a knight? It was a knight who struck the blow. And I really feel it's important that even Galahad, who is genuinely, has to hear that. And he has to hear that and give weight and measure to that before he can. And then he's got to win her trust by saying, look, I may have helped one of your sisters here. This is who I am. But he really, when he says, I understand, sang Galahad, when trust has been betrayed, to trust again through grief and pain is hard for any maid. And I'm using maid there rather than naiad. And that, I hope, is one of those moments where the myth, or the story as I'm telling it, a mythopoeic, actually speaks into a real moment of crisis in our culture. And I'm conscious. I mean, when I started the little YouTube I have, I thought it was going to be for a couple of dozen students for a couple of months while I couldn't get into college. And then it sort of became a thing. I didn't even understand what it had become. One of my students said, oh, I see your YouTube has blown up. And I said, oh dear, that's terrible. How can we fix it? I didn't even understand what blown up meant. Anyway, I was interested to discover when I finally found there was a stats page that the majority of my subscribers and viewers were young men. I thought, well, at least while they're watching me, they're not watching Andrew Tate, you know. And I really began to feel that there might be something that needs to be, you know, the whole form. Both Spencer and Tennyson were very clear that part of the purpose of their retelling the matter of Britain was the formation of character in young men. And in fact, of course, MacDonald quite properly said this is for young men and young women, he said in his. So I'm without over egging it, I'm really trying to see how the legend speaks into, or the way I tell the story can speak into, a genuine thing that men have got to think twice about how somebody, and priests and pastors particularly, about how somebody may have been treated in the past. And you have to earn a trust which has been tragically many times betrayed. I feel that about the whole story. These stories were at some degree in the early Edwardian period. Some of them were, in my view, misused to get people gung-ho to go out, you know, into the kind of industrial carnage of the First World War. And I'm conscious that these, you know, all myths can be abused. So the idea of regaining trust by genuinely understanding why there is mistrust is really crucial in anybody's maturity, in going to maturity as a young person.
Well, and that seems to me to be directly tied into the larger theme of the work, because you have this, on the one hand, the Holy Grail is this great honor that has been bestowed upon England or Britain. And it's really amazing that, you know, Joseph brought it here and this has been the place to hold it for so long. But precisely for that reason, with the greater holiness of not just the Holy Grail, but all of the accoutrement that surrounded it, including the Spear of Longinus, there came a greater degree of spiritual responsibility, which has been abused in the past. That's what the Dolorous Stroke is. It's seizing the Spear of Longinus and using it to wound somebody in anger, which shouldn't be done. There have been numerous people, including most famously Nacian himself, who have sinned against the Grail, and therefore his long life is bearing a curse for his sins.
And yet it's also an opportunity for redemption.
Yeah, that's right.
And
and he's able to guide everyone.
Yeah, I kind of almost, when I got to the scene where Lancelot makes his confession to Nacian, and Nacian, you know, which lots of people have written to me about, particularly men, that they've been moved to tear by this, and they've kind of spoke to their souls and pierced their hearts, which, you know, I kind of hinted at, but I almost wanted to say more explicitly how essentially Nacian is also a penitent. That the reason why he's able to speak words of grace to Lancelot is that he himself is a man in need of grace. I said somewhere to someone, I felt also a bit weird because I was beginning with the Grail, because I think the Grail is the heart of the matter. Also, to be frank, at the time I began it, I had a sort of health issue. And I genuinely didn't know if I would live to complete the rest of it. So I thought, if I do nothing else, I must tell the Grail story.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turned out I was okay. So, I carry on. But I was conscious that I was beginning an epic poem called Merlin's Isle, where at a point at which Merlin has already departed the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no Merlin. But I think this is really significant. And this isn't this is there in the sources. I think it's highly significant that whereas Merlin, who's a quasi-Christian figure, and I make him perhaps more, is able to deal with the matter of nature, as it were, with the proper, if you think the cardinal virtues and the making of Camelot.
Mm-hmm.
But Merlin is not really in a position to be a minister of grace. He's not
That's right.
in that human situation of complete fallenness.
Mm-hmm.
So that Merlin's mantle has to fall on Nasian,
Mm-hmm.
because when it comes to the Grail and the things of holiness and the blood of Christ, it's paradoxically only a repentant sinner knows
Mm-hmm.
what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
A person who is an angel or a person who is in need of no repentance doesn't get this. And I think there is a sort of movement from, I'm using this in a Thomistic sense of, nature as opposed to grace and grace
Mm-hmm.
coming in. I think there's something going on there, which is why, but I knew just in terms of the dynamics of my storytelling, that I couldn't really reveal Nasian's story
Mm-hmm.
until the Grail Knights arrive there. And then Nasian kind of makes his own confession. But there's a sense in which, for me, the whole poem is liturgical in this sense, in that although we see a liturgical procession finally when we get to the Grail Castle, and the liturgical procession leads us into a Eucharist,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, the Eucharist begins at Camelot when they're all called by Nasian to make confession before the quest. And the entire quest for each of the knights has some relation to the structure of the liturgy.
Yeah.
With confession and hearing the scriptures. So you start the journey to the Grail in Camelot, but from the moment you've made confession as you would do, the equivalent of that bit is Almighty God, to whom all hearts are open, all desires known, from whom no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And I think, at least in the Kester Song Grail, this is all completely conscious. I think that's somebody who's in a Cistercian ambit who's writing that. And there's a sense in which, of course, Galahad is the Pentecostal knight, because he represents that prayer of for purgation, and the coming of the Spirit. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that we may. He's the cleansing fire, which is why he reveals so much, why the Grail reveals so much. So when Guinevere sends for Galahad quite early on in the story and basically confesses to him, even though he hasn't asked for it, and he's just like a teenager, like, well, hey, wait, how do I deal with this? But, it kind of has to happen.
Yeah, there's one of the most troubling aspects of puzzling aspects of the tale for me the first time I read the Kest was that Galahad starts out where the Grail is. Before he even becomes a knight, his beginning place is where the Grail is, and then everyone's, oh, where's the Grail? How can we get to the Grail? How can we find the Grail? And what helped me to make sense of that, and this is connected to the liturgical movement and this sense of healing all these wrongs and making all these things right, is to think of it in the image of a prayer labyrinth. That it's not that when you walk a prayer labyrinth, it's not that you don't know where the center is. It's right over there, and you could walk over there and get there. It's not like a corn maze where there are walls keeping you from getting there. But the reason you don't do that is because the whole point is to walk this torturous path, this indirect path that brings you sometimes nearer, close, sometimes further from the goal. But you trust that if you keep to the path, not only will you eventually get there, but more importantly, the you that arrives there will be the right you.
Yeah,
and that's
we'll be ready. That's a very good analogy. Right? Junius, that's a really excellent analogy. I might
one of the things I really enjoyed about the way Galahad and the Grail comes out is this character of Nasian. You're right, Malcolm. Merlin is not equipped to be the spiritual minister. He's sort of a Christ druid, but he's not able to really be a priest. And one thing that I always struggled with in reading the Kestisangral was that there is not a strong depiction of grace. Lancelot's not able to glimpse the Grail because of his sin with Guinevere. Percival has sinned once. Bors has lusted. I mean, without total purity in that text, we have no hope of meeting God. Mm-hmm. And yet in this poem, we see glimpses of God's mercy. And the quest is treated, I like that image of the prayer labyrinth. The quest here is treated as a trial of sanctification rather than the impossibility of perfection. Mm-hmm. So when Lancelot weeps and he confesses his sin and gloriousness and his desire for Guinevere, he tells a story about how he sleeps with Elaine. Macian, who is later transfigured into the Christ, says, the very sin you most regret may turn to good if you will let his spirit work. And I love that. That's Christ coming down and meeting with Lancelot and telling him that, yes, we should be striving to be pure, but the quest of the Holy Grail is not achieved in perfection, like the Cistercian text seems to indicate. It's achieved in the following of Christ.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a weird story.
That was one of the most effective images. I mean, my heart was breaking for Lancelot. I mean, Mallory is one of the places where, Malcolm, I thought you really effectively cleaned up something that's fuzzy in Mallory. Because I remember that scene in Mallory. I mean, you get the sense that, like, yeah, Lancelot's asleep and he should be awake. But that motif is repeated. But here you made it very explicit that Lancelot was in his dream, he's seeing, but he can't move. And you can and he's aware of the fact that his sin is what prevents him from getting up and going closer. And so he's aware. And so the quest becomes, it prompts him. It does what Paul talks about the law doing, where the law is a teacher and the law makes me aware of my sin. The quest does that for Lancelot. And it's what enables his repentance. And it leaves me wanting him to be fully repentant, though I expect him to still fall again with Guinevere at the end of the story. But we'll
that
see.
will happen, of course. So I'll tell you just a weird little story, which was about the Kestisangral. So a lot of little things have happened in the course of my doing this, which I've just taken as signs to nudge me to keep going, like random coincidences. And one of the most remarkable was quite early in the sort of, absorbing all the texts and beginning to map the whole thing out. I realized I needed to go behind Mallory, and I probably needed to read the Kestisangral and see what Mallory had done with it and what I could do with it. But I didn't think my medieval French was going to be up to it, and I was no longer in Cambridge, so I couldn't just wander into the UL, the University Library there, and find what I wanted. So I was in my local pub, which is called the White Swan, which is a really down-home local pub. I'm in a small market town. It has no academic side to it whatsoever. It's farmers and people working in light industry and whatever. And the pub has had some books, which are all worn paperback sort of bunk busters, as we call them, sort of sex and shopping airport novels, and which you could take. And I was just glancing idly over the titles of these. And just between, two of these big sex and shopping novels was a copy of the best English translation of the Kestisangral with notes. It was just sitting there in this pub. And I said to the landlady, "Can I borrow this?" And she said, "You can have it. Nobody wants to read that." And I just felt like, how did it even get there? Why was it there on the evening? I was thinking, this is a text I need to grapple with. And there it was, just put into my hands in the most unlikely place. Anyway, that's a minor, weird thing, But
That's amazing. Annie, you've been wanting to jump in, so you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. Well, while we're on the topic of Lancelot, I also found that part of this poem deeply moving, and have always been a bit uncomfortable with the Lancelot narrative, because this feeling that part of what I was thinking about is the shift from pagan tragedy to Christian tragedy that happens, I think, with Shakespeare, where even though, you know, there's love lost and Elaine dies and that there are consequences, still Shakespeare, I think, is always pointing us to a grace, to a transcendent grace, to a light that points through. And I think I wanted that in the Lancelot story, and I think your poem brought that to the Lancelot story. And it's a good example of the way that this poem is taking the eternal stories, you know, the true myths, the old tales, and representing them in a way that illuminates our present moment. The wasteland is one significant way the poem does that, but also the Lancelot way, the way you bring him to repentance and grace. Because we are such a people, okay, we live in the wasteland, and we are also such a people stained by sin, sexual sin, right? The problem of pornography, the problem of fornication and adultery, like we're so soaked. And, you know, part of our male crisis we have right now, I think, is that young men struggle to find a place for themselves, but also there are deep chains of sin and shame because of the sexualization of our culture. And I think that the Lancelot tale so beautifully shows a path, again, a path out of the wasteland, a path out of that shameful sin. And I really, like, I've posted a little bit on Twitter, like I have a hard time talking about the poem right now without tearing up, because the whole poem for me is a kind of joy poignant as grief, because you know, and this is not flattery to Malcolm, because I really think that there's something bigger than you going on. As you said, the muse told you to take up the tale. It reminds me of Ransom and Paralandra when he's like, well, I'm just waiting for, you know, the person to come and save the green lady. And, you know, the Holy Spirit's like, dude, it's you. And you know, and he's like, well, I'm just a guy, you know, but there's this whole beautiful passage of like, yes, all the saints are just humans. So take up the stone, take up the tale. You know, we have some work to do at this moment, because here we are at the end of the wasteland. Our world has fallen apart. Our culture has fallen apart. It's been deconstructed to death. We are so in a sense, to me, this Arthurian epic is itself a kind of narrative eucatastrophe, a kind of taking the wasteland and turning it. So I was thinking about, pardon me for going on a little bit, but you know, the Wasteland is such an important poem to me. I love teaching it, because I think it really helps our students understand what happened to the West during the Great Wars. You know, and at the end of that poem, Eliot says, "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." I'm taking all these fragments of our broken culture. You know, Eliot's like a man standing in a great cathedral that's been bombed to pieces. And he's wandering, you know, amidst the ruins and the pieces of the West, picking them up, but they don't fit together. And reading this poem, you know, for me, it was so full of illusions. I wrote down a whole page of illusions, you know, so full of illusions, so full of double vision, so wonderful that it feels like the answer to the wasteland. You know, these fragments I have picked up and woven back together into the tale of my people, and then offered them in a form that all of which all can partake, right? And so back to Lancelot, telling this tale in a way that can cast a vision for young men stuck in sexual sin who don't believe there's a hope, and you've illuminated that hope, right, in a way that is I love this line. I'll just close with this line. Rest, Lancelot. Have peace at last. Trust the fair Elaine. The courts of heaven hear her prayers and send you soft and gentle airs. Trust that your love, and also hers, has never been in vain. That's a word, I think, excuse me, we really need to hear, right, as we wander lost amidst this wasteland.
Thank you. That's very moving, and you're certainly right where I was wanting my reader to be in that. Yeah, you're talking about, we're in this like highly sexualized society, and people see, as it were, in the kind of pornifying world so more before they've even begun to understand what actual intimacy with another person might be. So much so that the word intimacy itself has become a euphemism for sex, whereas actually, I've listening to my students, I sometimes felt that when there were times they might have been genuinely intimate, soul to soul, they're so scared of that real intimacy they have sex to avoid it, rather than to express it. Now, that's why on the positive side, I wanted, and I've gone further than the sources would normally have suggested on this, I wanted to offer in the relationship between Galahad and Drain a vision of genuine spiritual intimacy, which is not sexualized at all, but is more intimate and more ultimately soul to soul. And there's a sort of pledging of their truth. And when she puts the harness on him, and when he has his crisis in the kind of dark passages where he tries to turn back and he's just done the wrong thing, he says he's almost driven to distraction by grief for Dandrain, and by the feeling that he's letting her down if he doesn't complete the quest. So I was trying to suggest, to anyone among my readers, but particularly the young men, that there is a in the place we're in now, there's a kind of intimacy which at the moment, far from being expressed sexually, is actually precluded by sex. And that there needs to be, Milton talks about the sun-clad power of chastity, that we need to recover a space in which people can be can explore genuine tenderness and openness to one another in a way which isn't simply in which the hermeneutics of suspicion and the Freudian reading of everything don't say, oh, this is just about sex. It's not about sex at all. So I'm, as well as having the crisis with Lancelot, I wanted to suggest in the love between and the sense of intimate connectedness, I try and weave it in between Dandrain and Galahad. So I don't know if it came across successfully. I was trying to suggest at some point in the poem that the moment when Nacian, as it were, lays hands on Dandrain and says, this is your quest, you've got to do it, is the same moment that Lancelot is knighting Galahad without realizing that it's his son. That they both receive their calling at the same moment and then grow towards each other.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, the Nacian character, who again, I'm pretty new to all the whole Arthuriad idea, and I thought it was a compelling character. As y'all were discussing his character, it reminds me of Edmund in Chronicles of Narnia and Horse and His Boy. Even with in front of someone like Rabadash, even a traitor may mend, or even like Peter or Paul had oftentimes people are full of holiness and wisdom are people who have fallen and been redeemed, like the whole kintsugi sort of thing metaphorically. But what Annie's saying reminds me of, well, again, like I only knew like these cultural references I had, certainly Monty Python. It wasn't really obvious what the, like the obvious Christian underpinnings were. Besides the fact there was the Grail, which clearly is a reference to the Last Supper and communion and things like that. But I was frankly stunned at just like how did Malcolm add all of these very obviously Christian, like it seemed like this was like culturally even like all of Camelot's court were Christ followers, more or less, even for all their flaws and such. And I was like, man, did Malcolm add a lot? But then hopefully
I'm restoring
all there.
Yeah. So I read the appendices, and that was where Malcolm, you explained yourself like this has basically just been sort of siphoned off. And this has gotten added back in, and then it was like, this makes so much sense. Because obviously a lot of adaptations are just trying to get at specific using the story for their own means. Certainly that movie from 1995, First Night, was meant to be like a salacious court intrigue, love triangle sort of thing, but that's
Yeah.
without any of the redemptive or mystical elements really. And obviously, so it was interesting to see all of that, like, and like Lancelot's repentance. I kind of didn't see that coming. Like, I feel like I knew the part about Lancelot and Guinevere, and I was like, does Arthur even know? And if he does, how is he trusting Lancelot? And it's like, they just kind of roll on like this, and everything's okay. And they didn't, because there was the repentance. And I know there's more, as you hinted at, Malcolm. But the fact that that there. It was interesting to see it reclaimed as Christian tale, and I'd love to hear you say some more about that, Malcolm. It looks like you were just about to, and even quote some of your own
well, I was
work
just
from the book.
I was trying to find. I think the thing that Andy did there, that the line you quoted about there's no love can have been in vain. Even the fallen love is not completely in vain. There's always something in love and loving that God can redeem. I just wanted to affirm that and say, like, that's completely at the heart of my vision, that he never throws anything good away. Even when we take a good thing and throw it away, he sort of keeps it. And, so that includes the love for Elaine and the love for Guinevere. These things can be restored, but restored in the right way. It's interesting when I was... one of the people who read that same passage that you quoted, here we are. Offer to Christ your double pain. No love can ever be in vain. You can find innocence again, and all may yet be well. Somebody, in a completely different context, who'd quarreled with a friend and was thinking, that whole friendship was wasted, came to me and said, "This passage gave me hope."
Yeah. And on that, go ahead.
I want to jump in real quick, because I think, Matt, you've landed on something that's really important that we haven't talked about a lot. I'd love for some more thoughts on this, because I think the Arthurian tradition, some of the sources I read in Josh Fullman's class, I mean, you go back to the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, it's such a Christianized culture and world that the sources are just drenched with liturgy, with the sacred calendar, with the saints. And it's almost as if you have sort of like an occasional reference to a druid, but a lot more references to priests. But if you go to any kind of contemporary representation of the Arthurian tradition, this was a little bit of a hobby horse of mine in teenage years. I just read a bunch of fantasy versions of Arthurian novels. I had an English teacher who probably made what I today would call a terrible decision and let me pick a novel off of a list. I picked Marion Zimmer Bradley's the House of Avalon. And I mean, that was a feminist pornographic telling of the Arthurian story, which I would never hand to a high schooler today. And I should not have read it as a high schooler, but that's the typical modern take, is just to take Arthur and make it so and there have been a couple of more contemporary films doing it this way, where it's like Arthur is basically a mostly pagan guy with a little bit of Christianity sprinkled in. And I think, Malcolm, one of your greatest triumphs in this poem, if I can speak very dangerously perhaps, is that you make evident just how Christian the court and the story of Arthur is. And like, it's all there in Mallory.
It is all there in the sources.
The Pentecostal story, the Grail, and this is where even and one other thing, like on this too, these are two thoughts I wanted to toss out. Then we'll go back to free for all. But I also loved that in as much as if Lancelot is a positive vision for men repenting, Dindrain is a positive image of women having a calling and a quest that does not require them to give away their femininity. I thought you did a phenomenal job in giving us Dindrain having her own heroic heroine nature, but she's still a woman.
A word I hesitated over, and I thought, no, I'm going to use this. I used the word ordain when
I will admit I quibbled with you in my head over that. I would not use that term. That's you.
Putting my cards on the table here. My wife is ordained, and she's a very wise woman. I wouldn't be here writing these poems if it wasn't for her. And she was one of the first women to be ordained priestess. So I actually, I'm full of old traditions, but there are some things that I think where we've done the right thing. in developing the tradition, and I think the ordination of women is one of them. So I very much wanted to. I mean, I feel it's terrible that I don't think she's even named in Mallory. She's a kind of background figure, and I wanted to bring her into the foreground. So
I went and looked, and all I could find is she's just described. I think she's still called Percival's sister, but
she's just Percival's sister. I thought, oh, come on. And then I thought, what is the backstory here? We also get somebody who's Percival's aunt in Mallory. I'm going like, he meets his aunt, he meets his sister. How did that happen? Don't you know? Like, and I imagined the whole thing, and we all know the story about how his father dies and his mother doesn't want him to be a knight. So I imagined this single mother with her sister there to help her. And the sister, being a woman of spiritual gifts and vocation, recognizing the same gifts in the daughter and saying to the poor mum, I know you've lost your son to this, but now, unfortunately, your daughter is also called, and helping her to see that. And then the two women nurture each other. That's also partly from the influence of my wife and my mother. But my mother introduced me to George MacDonald. And one of the things that George MacDonald does in spades is wise middle-aged or elderly women who totally know more stuff than the brash young men. If you reread Fantastes in that light, you see, so I wanted to foreground the women. That was kind of quite an important thing to me. And I thought the material would allow me to do that. But I totally wanted to restore the sacral thing to all of it. And that seemed to me to be important. Listen, guys, this has been a very high-level discussion, and I'd love to stay with you all. But I only did this at the last minute because I thought I might inhibit you. But in fact, I promised to take my son, who's going through a bit of a crisis at the moment, out this evening. So I'm going to bail out at this point, but leave you to it. And as I say, with entirely my blessing, and as far as I'm concerned, the text now stands as a thing in itself. It is the text that I will sit at the feet of this text as much as anybody else and try and learn from it. That's what you have now is the poem. And I find I have to say it's slightly difficult. The English and American culture is so different. And, we're pretty self-deprecatory and generally oblique in the way that America is. But there's a cult of celebrity in America, which I'm now feeling slightly the sharp end of. And I'm continuously wanting to deflect attention paid to the poet back to the poem. Compared with the poet is comparatively uninteresting. That's why he wrote the poem, So I'm always wanting to say, just look at the work itself. Let the work be its thing and do its thing. Anyway, on that happy note, I'm going to leave the studio. But thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us, Malcolm. We're very grateful that you could join us for a bit.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Well, now that he's gone,
Okay.
Now we can see what we really think.
I want to talk about the poetry.
I was like, oh man, I'm just like, I don't know what. He's a very big name and a very important person, and I'm glad he jumped on our call. That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the poetry stuff.
Good.
And I want to do that in two ways. And the first way is he mentioned some of his influences in MacDonald and Spencer and Milton, but I want to mention another influence that I understand he comes by honestly, and that's Scottish, the Scottish ballad tradition. I think I remember him telling me that his grandmother was a published Scottish poet. And the book you saw me grab earlier was Walter Scott's Lady of the Lake. And I just want to read a little bit of this. You get some of the flavor of how this goes. Like the loose crags whose threatening mass lay tottering over the hollow pass, as if an infant's touch could urge their headlong passage down the verge, with step and weapon forward flung upon the mountainside they hung. The mountaineer cast glance of pride along Ben Ledy's living side, then fixed his eye and sable brow, full on Fitzjames, how sayest thou now? These are Clan Alpine's warriors true, and Saxon, I am Roderick Dhu. There's a real there's the same sort of rushing gentle flowing emotion that you have in the Grail that I think is a lot of that. Walter Scott is the master of the ballad form, and that's the form Malcolm's chosen here. And I think it's really well chosen. If any of the traditional long form poetic forms are going to be able to be heard in our day, this probably has the best chance. Right. So I think that's a really fortuitous choice.
I'd love to make sure we get Matt in on this one. So, Matt, since you're the only professional musician amongst the group, I'm sure several of y'all have more musical skills than I do. Matt, what do you make of the ballad, the choice of the ballad for this?
It's I think that Malcolm says I don't remember where it is in the book, but actually it wasn't. No, it was in an interview you did with not the Hobbit. That would have the Hobbit podcast would have made a lot of sense. The Habit with Jonathan Rogers is what I mean. Is where he was talking about how with songs typically you have words and you have music. They're their own separate things. You combine them together. Whereas like with poetry, it's like the music is built in, like it's like of a piece, like reading. I think it was in the beginning where I can look back here. I have the book right here, but I mean, yeah, where it's like basically that the reading it aloud is the best way to do it. And especially at the beginning, I was reading out loud softly to myself. And yeah, like they're like you talk about like basically the mouthfeel of the words, as though we're like texture, like food, which I think is poetry generally speaking. Where like Seamus Heaney, like you're gonna read something of his, like reading it out loud is a whole other layer. Kind of like with music, hearing it live is just that much better. Yeah, so I mean, like there's definitely musicality to it. It would not be difficult to, like take a passage of this and literally kind of like a scripture song sort of situation, just like take the passage exactly and write a melody to go with it. I mean, literally some of its songs, kind of like, in The Hobbit, and speaking of that, fittingly enough, there's lots of songs. Like you don't have the melodies, but it's not hard to imagine them because the way that the words are written and flow together when they're all put together. Which as a small tangent, we'll see if we go this direction or not, but I wanted to point out, I think my favorite character in the whole story though is Sir Bors, who I didn't know anything about, and turns out like he's he's a musician. That doesn't hurt, and he's actually the only one of the Grail Knights who comes back to Camelot to share the story. Like he's the one most fit to do it too. And I also think he's kind of the Samwise Gamgee of this story. Like I don't think he literally picks up and carries Galahad at any point, but he encourages him meaningfully. He backs him up on the harp as well, in his singing to In the Wasteland. But I like the fact that he's sort of like the anti-Lancelot as far as his like I'll just read a small bit from the Adventures of Sir Bors from Stave 5. So it says this. Sir Bors de Ganis rode on quest, rejoicing in his heart. Although a knight of Camelot, he knew he was no Lancelot, and feared it might not be his lot even to make a start. I mean, those rhymes are actually pretty on the nose, but moving on. But good Sir King Arthur heard his vow and gave him leave to go. Fear not that this is not for you. You are a loyal knight and true, and you may yet have deeds to do far greater than you know. The humble may attempt this quest and ride amongst the great. The great maybe will quest in vain. Wise Nacian has made it plain. The great must lose all they may gain, and great achievements still remain for those of low estate. So he's humble. He's totally a counter to some of the what you think of as a knight. But I think it's also noble that Arthur, says like, hey, you got every right to be here. You're at my round table, and I want you to be here. And so like again, kind of like Samwise, like the humble gardener. He literally actually refers back to like, well, when I was back home, like if I were like plowing this field or tending my garden, this is what I would. So there's a definitely an endearingness to him, but in the fact that he's part of that ensemble cast, together with Percival, who of course ends up being the, spoiler alert, the heir of the Fisher King, and so they each have their own part to play. Like everyone has their role. It's I think it's beautiful, and I just especially like this character partly because I didn't know anything about him until I read this, and I was like what a pleasant surprise.
He comes across as so much better in the poem than he does in The Sword and the Stone, the cartoon movie. I mean, he's literally just a bore in the like redneck sense of the word.
Yeah, so I'd love to connect what all three of you are saying actually, because Junius, you said I think the ballad form is the only form that has a chance to be heard and Bors, the common man, the farmer, he is the one who's been given the song to sing. Okay, a ballad form is an appropriate form of poetry. I think that to me is very much at the heart of why I love this poem so much, right? Because what's happened, so the storytellers are the keeper of culture, right? The poets are the fathers of civilization. Those who sing the story to the people are the ones who preserve like the values and the vision and the identity of the people, where the keepers of our stories have totally betrayed us, completely betrayed us in the last 150 years. What you have is that the art has become elitist, right? So the real meaning is way up here in this esoteric, obscure, very difficult form. It's all escargot and caviar, right? And then the stories for the people have become just pure propaganda, and that should not be. A culture will be destroyed when you take from the people a proper, when the keepers of our tales do not do their job and retell the eternal truths in a form for the common people so we can hold together as a people with a shared identity and shared value. So, that's what I see Guite doing, and it needs to be poetic form, I think. Jonathan Pajot's doing this work of recovering fairy tales, right? Because Disney had deconstructed and turned our fairy tales into propaganda. So he's trying to pick back up the fairy tales and tell them in this way where we're picking up the eternal story, but highlighting present need within the story. And then Guite's doing that with the Arthurian tales. And it's proper for it to be in a kind of bread and butter form. Not free verse is crap. I mean, it has its place, okay? But the thing is that when you take away form, then it's just the water just spreads and it has no power. When you take a form and the strictures and the difficulty and the resistance of the form, it gathers the water into a potent channel. And so that's what I love about this poem overall, is that its ballad form is very accessible. I really think anyone could read it and enjoy it. And yet it is poetry. And so it's helping us recover our sense of poetry, which is fundamental to our humanity. Every child deserves a nursery rhyme. Every people deserves folk songs. Like beautiful language that contains beautiful truth is essential to our humanity. And so he's picking back up these tales that help English-speaking people remember who they are in a form that is available to everyone. So I think it's very apropos that Bors, right, is the one who picks up the harp and who tells the tale.
Yeah, Annie, I love that. I'll add to that. You're talking about really the difference between what we can kind of generally call poetry, which includes like free verse, and the concept of verse itself. The language that Guy uses in the poem regarding Merlin is grammary. Well, grammar has two meanings. It's the occult, right? It's like magic, but it's also like the language we use for structure and imposing order on language so that verse can flow. And I think there's probably really at least two elements to add on to this here. Like you're talking about how art has been kind of deconstructed and minimalized as a result. Modernism saw the conquest of the novel over the poem and secularism over faith. And if I were to posit a methodological connection between these two, it would probably be the destruction of beauty. People don't read poetry any longer, even though they were reading Tennyson in droves in the 19th century. But it's because the 20th century decided form was irrelevant and artificial. And so when obviously Guite has a lot of affection for Coleridge, right? We see elements of Coleridge throughout this, but he's coming back to this ballad because it's a lowbrow poetic form that anyone can access. It can be musically accompanied, or it can be a song without music. This poem is begging to be read aloud and in community. And as one other point, I mean, he publishes this with Rabbit Room Press in Nashville, which is associated with Ecstasis and Christianity Today and Comment and these other outlets that their vision is for a communal experience of art that doesn't just take place in the reader's mind, it's kind of subjectively or quietly. It's out in the real world amongst people. And so I don't think it's a stretch to think of Guite imagining his work read in book clubs and pubs where people are taking up the tale together.
It's reminding me of a conversation we had in my Greek myth class today. This was the last class before review and final exam. And we got into something of a debate about the way I made the argument that Greek myth is really foundational for establishing a common culture. And I made the argument that in large part, borrowing from Paul Kingsnorth, that there's at least a way to think of our moment as really being post-cultural, because we don't have a common culture that we're all recognizing together. We don't know the same stories. We don't have the same images. We don't have the same icons, if you will. One of my students pushed back, and his pushback was really related to the fact that he is in a bunch of completely separate, isolated cultures that are distinct for their, and he used the phrase meme culture. And I just sort of, I'm sure y'all have had these moments where I just sort of like responded. I was like, I probably could have handled that a little bit better. But I was just like, no, meme culture is not a culture. That is a product of everyone having a phone and everyone being connected to the internet and everyone sharing a common joke. But it's not thick enough to really be a culture that binds people together and gives them a common object of worship that holds a community of people together across generations. And so I think everything y'all are describing is pointing to really these stories are they've played that role in previous generations. And I think what Guite is doing is to some extent he's taking the accessibility of the Monty Python sketches, because Monty Python had the accessibility of the Arthurian world, but those stories don't actually make sense if you haven't read anything else. If you just watch Monty Python, you're just laughing and not knowing really why these stories matter or really what half the jokes are. But he's taking that accessibility and he's pairing it with a reworking of the story that streamlines it and makes it even clearer, while also just upping the Christianity level of it 100-fold, I think. But all of which could be a foundation for a renewed culture to some extent, or part of a cultural renewal.
Yeah, I will say that. I mean, the Christian element is original and important. It's not upping it so much as a return, because the moment that creates King Arthur is the moment of the Britons who were Christians under threat from the Angles and Saxons. It was the Anglo-Saxons who eventually became the English that Arthur has to defeat, and that's what gives birth to that legend. Probably strengthening a lot of what you're saying, I found myself very confused by the Bors character. The fact that none of you are makes me feel that maybe I'm not remembering how he's been changed in Mallory, because it's been a minute since I read Mallory. But pre-Mallory, Bors is Lancelot's cousin, and he is a prince. He is the son of one of the kings in France, as Lancelot is. Lancelot's father is Bors's father's brother. Bors and Lionel are princes. Later on, when Lancelot is driven out of England because of what he's done, spoilers, Lancelot and Guinevere, he, rather than taking up the thrones in France, both of which are being ceded to him, he gives Lionel the one and Bors the other and says, you guys pick whichever ones you want. So this, when I'm reading Bors talking about being a simple man and these sorts of things, I'm like, you're not, though. You know, you were raised at court, and not with your dad, but you were raised at court, and you are of royal lineage. So that was perplexing to me. But I think that the choice, whether that's a choice to continue with Mallory, if Mallory has made that change, or it's a choice to move in that direction if that change wasn't already in Mallory, that choice is, I think, for the sake of some of these things that you're talking about. I did find it strange because you already have it in Percival. The whole point of Percival is that he's mocked throughout the tale that introduces him in Chrétien de Troyes, because he's this simpleton who doesn't know basic etiquette, and he has to sort of learn that along the way. And the repeated refrain of him being a Welshman throughout the entirety of the Vulgate cycle is sort of this, like, yeah, he's kind of an idiot because he's a Welshman, which is also funny because Arthur's Welsh originally. So there's all these layers going through there.
Yeah, and Percival makes the mistake of not asking about the Grail.
That's right, which is the source of the very first story. In front of it, yeah. He should have asked. Asking about the Grail is very similar to Lancelot being asleep or unable to move in the face of the Grail. And yeah, he's all, in a sense, in Chrétien, the dolorous stroke is Percival not asking about the Grail. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that brings me to a different question, and we'll see where this goes. But I'm quite curious. That Junius, you're already moving in this direction. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on what significant changes does Guite make, because I think we've all mentioned the fact that he sort of clarifies some of and he talks about this himself about like he talked about earlier tonight about the Roger Green giving him pathways through the thickets of Mallory. So let's think for a moment about what some of those thickets are and what choices Guite is making that are perhaps significant for the story. The one I'll mention that just leapt out at me most significantly was really minimizing just how much Lancelot and Guinevere have been sleeping together. Like the way Guite tells this story, I'm not actually sure they ever slept together yet. And that's going to be really, I don't know how you destroy Arthur's kingdom if they haven't slept together like that. But he really minimizes that. So that was one artistic choice. What others come to mind?
Well, I mean, to add to that, if you recall, Josh, we talked about this a little bit in our Arthurian seminar. In Mallory, if Lancelot sleeps with her, it may only be once. But that's a little bit unclear. There's a lot of rumors that are going around.
I'm thinking particularly of the and this may not fit chronologically with where Guite is, but in Mallory, this is well before the Grail cycle begins. Yeah. There's a moment where Elaine comes to Camelot, and like there's this really funny scene where like basically Lancelot just keeps ending up in Elaine's bed.
Yeah.
But he thinks he's in Guinevere's bed. And he's like, whoa, I'm in the wrong bed again. And the implication, at least, which I'll grant you is an implication, is that he has been pretty regularly in Guinevere's bed. So at least that's a heavy hint, I think, in Mallory.
And it's quite clear in the Vulgate cycle that they've been sleeping together loads. Yeah.
I mean, Lancelot's guilt is significant. So even if he didn't choose to give artistic attention to, we aren't sure how he's probably I would guess he's saving that for, the end. And that's then bringing attention to that is going to be part of the unraveling of Camelot.
Right.
But, the implication given Lancelot's deep sense of remorse and repentance is that the guilt is significant.
Yeah.
I think
and let's not forget he's got story from before this still coming as well. And so there may be not only at the end, but even before this, we might see a lot more.
Right.
Go on.
But I think, the biggest thing he changes, well, we already talked about Dindrain's heroine journey, which was lovely. And then the other really significant change is the inclusion of the Naiad tale and how he's really developing environmental themes because of the way that they speak to our particular moment. The very Paul Kingsnorth against the machine. The machine is devouring the land and spoiling the land and ruining the land, and the grief. So I think he's giving voice to that grief through the story, but also trying to point us right to, as we've kind of talked about a little bit. I'll just read a passage from that Naiad passage. So it's Galahad.
This is the first Naiad, right?
Pardon?
This is the first Naiad, right?
Yes. So for me, it's page 80. Let me see if I can remember. Galahad and the Naiad, page 80, stave 3 of the first book, I believe. No, anyway, page 80. So he comes across the Naiad whose streams are spoiled. And I don't know if you've seen in the news lately, like this is really an issue in England or Britain currently. England was a land of beautiful hills and beautiful streams, and really the streams are being destroyed right now. So he comes across this polluted stream and the weeping Naiad, and her stream has been despoiled by a wicked wizard knight, and so he goes to slay the knight, and he does. And so in this part of the story, it's really just Galahad courageously fighting the evil knight. So there's not any much subtlety to somehow you have to fight the wicked power principality that is choosing to despoil the streams. But once he despoils the knight, he takes off the mask of the knight. I mean, this was a little bit shocking to find, and I think appropriately shocking. Sometimes he's using shock to good effect. Beneath the mask of hardened steel, no human face remained. Just springs and bolts and cogs and wheels, all rusty, worn, and stained. And from his fallen form there came a sad mechanic sound, the sound of dark machinery, all slowly winding down. So here he's really echoing that poetic tradition, beginning with the Romantics of, Wordsworth's, we are out of tune. For all this, we are out of tune. The world is too much with us. Hopkins, we're all bleared and smeared with trade. And in that sense, in this modern world, that we've traded beauty and meaning for power, but it's led us to be out of joint, out of tune with the beauty of our world. And it's going to destroy us unless we find a way back into chivalry, a way back into, a proper harmony with the creation of which we are a part.
It seems, that part with the the knight that had become unhuman, and with the gears and springs and whatnot, including the illustration that Stephen had, with like the, it's like he's anyway, like as though he were like some sort of medieval robot
Yes.
situation, like so. If I and yeah, since again I don't have a lot of the background in Arthur stories. My understanding is that particular story was one that Malcolm wrote recently, like basically as part of his addition to this. I mean, it's in keeping with it, and it even gets referenced later, helpfully. But yeah, when I read that, like something about it, like machines, like there hasn't been a lot of that going on. I mean, like nothing more like technologically advanced, maybe like a portcullis or maybe a crossbow. I don't think there was even anything like that in here. So like, yeah, something that was a machine was like it did kind of stick out a little bit. Like I got the point he was making, and point well taken. And as a way of updating it, I think in a way that didn't, it stuck out a bit, but I thought that it still worked and it fit in the story. But that am I correct to say that there's not, like in the original sources, there's not anything that directly points to that story?
There's nothing I recall.
No, there's always unseating of knights, but they're always human in some way. I don't think we even really have sprites or naiads that are they're often fighting. Sometimes you'll get a obscure like a false woman who tries to seduce a knight, but it's really more of a vision and all that than a whole lot of definitely nothing mechanistic.
I think we should begin every comment about a change by saying that the biggest change that Malcolm made, and so I will join the tradition and say I think the biggest change that Malcolm made is that the Grail Knights go the wrong direction. They go west. In the original, they take the Grail back to Ceres, which is the city that Nacian comes from. Nacian was the brother of the king of Ceres. And there, all the action culminates there. They get back to the city that was the first place the Grail went. It's where Joseph took the Grail after he left Jerusalem. And that city's conversion to Christianity, because of the presence of the Grail, is an important part of the Vulgate Cycle's story of the Holy Grail. And then when the three Grail Knights get there, they find that the city has fallen back into paganism. They're actually imprisoned for a time by the king, and then ultimately the Grail ascends to heaven from there. So I was very surprised when he talked about them taking it west. I was like, what are you going to go west for? There's nowhere over there for it to go. Ceres is the other way. So that was an interesting change.
Where's Ceres, real quick? Sorry. You said it's not west.
It's partway between Jerusalem and Babylon.
Is it in any way an actual historical city, or is it a contrivance of the tradition? Okay.
As far as we can tell, it's a contrivance. But and it's actually then because you get this folk etymology where people think that Saracens are people who come from Ceres, but actually the name Saracen was in use before that, and there's no relation.
I'll just tag on something to what I was saying before about the machine, Night Game Machine. Stephen Kratz, the illustrator himself. We're getting him and Malcolm both involved one way or the other. That's pretty cool. So thanks for chiming in, Stephen. He said that automata are common in plenty of classical literature. So there is precedence. Okay, fantastic. And I actually like what the other thing he said, which is I'm honestly not sure if Malcolm has seen Star Wars enough to know how similar the Clockwork Knight is to Darth Vader. So well played, sir.
We
Junius,
found a hole in his edition.
To your observation, so again, that's where I don't know the original texts. I haven't read enough of them to have picked up on that. But now that you mention it, and a little bit, Matt, to what you're talking about, again, because I've read about these, but haven't read Chrétien de Troyes, I haven't read all of Malory. Like, I would sometimes be like, is he getting this from Lewis, or did Lewis get this from the older sources? Right? There was just this kind of delightful echoing, right? Delightful echoing, as you read it. But so I wonder, because I wrote down, oh, this is like, it feels like he's highlighting something in Tolkien here, a sense of the fellowship of the Grail. It feels like he's highlighting something from Lewis, like Dindrain feels very Lucy-like to me. We have the albatross, which is both Coleridge and Lewis. We have he in the
and Coach Lewis is albatross there too, right? The albatross says to them what Aslan says to Lucy. Yeah.
Yes, right. Exactly. And those are these beautiful echoes. It's an echo of multiple sources and how they're all gathering in this cauldron of story, right? To give us a rich image of who we are. So then you know, in the epilogue, he quotes joy poignant as grief, basically. So I wonder if that's just a Tolkien-esque that he's saying, you know, we are a Tolkien saturated people now. And so as he's trying to connect Arthur to, I think the Lord of the Rings is the epic of the 20th century, even though it's not poetry. So we can quibble about that, but you know, it's an epic tale that helped us as a English speaking people of the West start to grapple with a shared story and a shared identity again. So maybe he's trying to pick up on that theme of the way that time moves from east to the west, and the west is the setting of the sun, and the west is the place in death, which will become that portal to eternal life for us. So I don't know what you think about that as an interpretation of the change.
Yeah, that's kind of the way my mind went right away too, because it's, you know, the Numenor was in the West, and Lewis even makes reference to Numenor and at one point in the Chronicles of Narnia, which was unsanctioned. But so yeah, I did think that he was maybe trying to connect it to that. So I remember when I first started seeing these connections and thinking, wait, wrong way. I thought, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see where that goes. And I didn't see it really realize, you know, it's sort of, they go in a westish direction, but then Galahad kind of just, you know, they're at Corbenic, if I remember correctly, the ship just shows up and there's Dindrain, and then she's resurrected, and then Galahad and Dindrain and the Grail ascend from there. And so it doesn't even make it very far west, actually. So I don't, you know, I'm not sure if that was what he was playing for. If he was, I think the ball gets dropped a little bit on it. But.
So I don't know if you can say not very far west, because really it says that Isle is a place out of time. It's out of space. I don't really think it can be measured. So it's a magic, you know, it's a magical place outside of.
Except that Lancelot wanders there by accident, and that's how Galahad is conceived. Not
in Guite's version. It's not on the Isle. It's a. Okay, we're different. Okay, there's a difference between the Isle and the Grail Castle.
Okay,
that maybe we're confusing here. The Grail Castle seems to be in Wales.
Yeah, Corbenic.
But the Isle is somewhere out of normal.
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump in here before we continue spiraling into Arthurian footnotes, which is where these conversations can quickly go. As far as this was a place that I found Malory very confusing when I was trying to teach Malory. It made not a problem when I'm reading Malory in a graduate seminar and professors can spar about what it means. That's fine. Teaching Malory to 11th graders is very confusing to figure out where exactly is the Grail going and what's happening. I thought that was one of the things that Malcolm did that was just very effective. Like, it now makes a coherent story that has a lot of other things that we can follow up on. But there's also it also now makes a coherent story. And I agree with Annie in that there is, it felt very much to me like as the Grail quest was achieved, and the castle where the dolorous stroke happened, the whole wasteland felt to me like we kind of moved from a geographic location to a mythological location. And Boris returns with the story of what happened in the mythological realm. And I mean, I would refer to all of that as fairy in that sort of Tolkien-esque sense, that we move from the real world to the fairy world and then back, and in that whole story. But so if only because I know Matt's got a time, and we're coming up on 2 hours. I do want to kind of start spiraling around towards the end. And Matt, when you have to duck out, feel free. We may or may not be done then. I want to give Stephen Krotz a quick shout out with an apology because he's the illustrator of this volume, and I think he's done phenomenal work. And I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in just a second about the illustration. My apology is this: when I was originally setting this live stream up, I popped a screenshot of the front cover or not a screenshot. I took a picture of the front cover, popped that into Grok, and tried to get Grok to add all of your names to the screenshot. Grok then went ahead and on the front cover, there's sort of a flame person who I don't think is a demon, but maybe like a stern looking fairy fellow, but definitely like a fire elemental something. Well, Grok went ahead and just added devil horns to that thing. And Stephen Krotz somehow spotted this on Twitter and called it out. And we got that changed. But I really appreciated Stephen noting my mistake. I thought I had caught all the errors, and apparently I did not. So I'm just going to stop using AI for like any images. All that being said, I would love to get y'all's thoughts on the illustrations because the passage, the Clockwork Knight is particularly, I think, helpful for illustrating that passage. But throughout this, there are these just gorgeous illustrations throughout. So any thoughts on the illustrations and how the illustrations contribute to the story or to the tradition in general?
I remember when Stephen and I were talking about the illustrations, and he said one of the things that was difficult was trying to decide what the knight's armor should look like. And part of that was just a matter of what's going to show up well in the context of the type of art that he was doing. And so the knights that you see them in the illustrations are more influenced by what the Romano-Celtic knights of Britain, the time that Arthur actually belongs to, would have been wearing than the high chivalric continental knights that we usually associate in the full plate mail and that sort of a thing. And I think that, that's a very nice move, both because, as he says, from his artist expertise, it's going to work better for the type of art he wanted to do, but also because I think that in many ways it allows the humanity of the knights to show through more in the illustrations. One of the things that keeps happening in the tale is that knights who are friends or relatives keep hurting one another and sometimes killing one another because they can't recognize one another, and they don't bother to raise their beavers and say who they are before they fight. They just fight first and find out who they just killed later. And one of the things that could come, if you try to really portray that honestly in the art, it's just going to be like random knight in armor, other random knight in armor. Is that a machine? Right. And so this notion of letting us see the knight's faces, not trying to put a heavy beaver on them and disburdening them somewhat of some of that armor so they can be, their bodies can be more expressive. I think that worked out really well.
Yeah, I think this is great. On all these illustrations are really powerful. The one of the last ones on page 302, you've got these overlapping visions of Christ as he's kind of showing himself in the Eucharist and the Grail, are just incredible. And kind of is illustrating what is happening in that moment as all these different knights see different aspects of the mystery, and none of them see the whole thing. And it's in some ways, it's kind of like how an illustrator works, right? You get these pictures of things that happen in the book, but you don't see all of it. But I was showing this book to my 14-year-old who is, as a high schooler, is starting to has already developed a sort of kind of tough exterior, cynical persona he's taking on to survive high school. But I showed him the book and the illustrations, and all of a sudden he was interested. All of a sudden he thought, oh, this might be cool to read. And so I think, it's critical that for a people who do not read poetry, that we have illustrations to go along with this, because it increases the accessibility to the common person, or reminds them of the value and beauty of poetry. And it's a kind of also a reminder that art is self-perpetuating, that more art leads to more art. Both good and bad, unfortunately. But the imagination is stirred by words that prompts a response in the artist to depict in figures what she sees, and vice versa, right? It's increasing this communal activity of narrative art, and I think that was a brilliant move for Rabbit Room Press when they put this together.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Malcolm talks about Stephen being as much an author in the acknowledgments, as much an author of the book as himself. And I mean, it's like, like an album and great cover art, like it's all part of the experience. And I think my favorite illustration might be this 2-page one right here. This is on Solomon's ship with the Grail Knights and Dinadrain and Galahad. And also the one where Dinadrain's, like looking like pulling her sleeve back, like allowing herself to, be put in danger to save someone else. Yeah, I mean, they're all stunning. And I do, Stephen's been commenting in the comments about the his interpretation of the armor isn't always maybe what Malcolm would have thought, but it shows that they're each taking their own approach to the originals. I mean, Pauline Bain's illustrations of Narnia often don't necessarily go precisely with what I would have been thinking when I was, reading through the books. But also, like, it's interesting how much like the images, so I was a French minor in college. Long story. Not gonna use it a lot, but I ended up watching the 96 or 97 version of Les Mis in English. There were some French films to watch, but that one, it wasn't a musical. Liam Neeson, Claire Danes, Jeffrey Rush. It was perfectly cast. When I think of Javert, I think of Jeffrey Rush. Like, I know I've seen like the Hugh Jackman, Anne Hathaway one. Yeah, that's good too. It's much closer to the actual story. But if I go back and read Les Mis, or if I sing one of my songs that's based on that, I got a couple of them. Then I think of, I think of Liam Neeson as Jean Valjean. Like there's something about, like, I love reading partly because it lets you use and poetry, and even song, like, they don't fill in everything for you imaginatively. They leave something for you to imagine. That's one of the things with like high CGI HD, kids cartoons and, immersive video game experiences. It's like they pretty much do all of the imagining for you. Whereas there's something left. But with this, the visuals and the poetry go together in a way that, like, they kind of give you like supports for your own imagination as well, but without giving you everything. Like, they're showing you some things, but not telling you everything that should be happening. So yeah, I mean, very well done, Stephen. I've appreciated your art for a long time. I know we haven't ever worked together on an album cover, maybe someday, but this is brilliant stuff. So well done, man. Yeah.
I'd like to hear where Stephen thinks, I saw in his comment that there was a departure. And while, Stephen, you're thinking about that, maybe typing it in for us. I think that the choice to go more archaic in the style is the right choice. It fits this theme. I keep bringing up of, we kind of live at the end of the world and we need to be reborn in a sense. We need to be reborn into our fairy tales, into our poetry. And so I think that going back to a more archaic style befits this theme of returning to origins, returning to remember who we are, so we can then begin anew. Kind of like Lewis says in Mere Christianity, like, if you realize that you've made a mistake, you have to go back in your problem. You have to go back to the place you made a mistake and then begin anew. And I think we really need to go back to the pre-modern sacramentalism, pre-modern stories, remember where we went astray in exchanging power for meaning, and then try to rebuild a coherent culture, a coherent story that can incorporate, the insights of modernity, but integrate them back into the past. Anyway, so I think that also, that it's like Gustave Doré's woodcuts that reminded me of those. And so I love that you're just stepping into an aesthetic tradition of epic illustrations that seems really apropos on several different levels.
I'm really glad you mentioned Doré, Annie, because I mean, I thought I made that same connection with the images. I mean, I think Dante and at least Mallory's version of the Arthurian legends have this in common, that they are just very imagery heavy. I think you read Mallory. I mean, I remember getting stuck on it's not meaningful. It's only a way of distinguishing the different knights. But in Mallory's version of the Tale of Sir Gareth, the Kitchen Knight, he encounters, I think it's the Red Knight, and the Green Knight, and the Blue Knight, and the Yellow Knight, and finally the Black Knight is the really big bad knight. And it's not like the colors are significant, except that they're bright and vivid, and they just distinguish. But then when you get to Mallory's description of the ship that Dendrain is on, even if he doesn't name Dendrain, suddenly the color, like he pays a lot of attention to the way this ship is shaped and designed, and he talks about the colors of the cloth that are there. And then hitting the what page are we on? 188, 189. This picture of the ship and being able to see Dendrain putting the scabbard on Galahad. I thought that just kind of brought it to life, and it seemed to dispel anything. I think there's a misconception that the Middle Ages, I mean, this is one the historians detest when people refer to the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages were a supremely intelligent era. That intelligence was not always expressed in written words. It was in a lot of cases, but you get a lot of deep intelligence happening in pictorial display. And you get theology and architecture with the cathedrals. And so I just thought it worked really well to pair beautiful ballad poetry with really strong images to create something where they complement each other. And I like what I'm just going to read his comment here on the screen. Stephen said, my Romano-Celtic shtick has and will clash occasionally with Guite's text. He has said we're both responding to the source stories in our own ways rather than making an extremely literal illustration of his version. I really like that because it's not that we're just like, oh, I'm going to make a carbon copy. Like, okay, it said the house was this color and was this high, and I'm going to make that description. Instead, there are multiple interpretations that give us as the readers different ways to process the story. Matthew, I know you may have to go, but I've got 3 questions left to wrap us up. We'll see how long this takes, but feel free to jet whenever you have to. What parts of this poem do you want to mention that we have not discussed? I think we've kind of hit the wasteland. We've hit Dendrain. We talked a little bit about Percival, a little bit about Lancelot. What have we not talked about from this poem that we really should talk about, and just thinking through what all's happening in this book?
Gawain. Gawain shows up in the Wasteland incident, and we see that he has been just getting his butt kicked by the demons in the Wasteland. They're just having their way with him. He's a little bit like the Lord, is it Roop, who's on the Dark Island in the version of the Dawn Treader. He can't tell friend from foe, doesn't know what's real and what's not, and all of that. I think that might come as a surprise. One of the things that I find teaching the Arthurian tradition is that students are often surprised by Gawain, because they've been told, oh, Gawain is going to be, every experience of Gawain is that he's the great one, he's all this other sorts of things, and he can often get, he comes off a lot less cool than they're used to. And so it's worth noting that, in this text, in the quest that Malcolm is following, Gawain does fail right from the beginning. He's given that same chance to repent that Lancelot is, and he's like, oh no, like I can't, penance is going to be too much trouble for me, I can't bother. And so Malcolm is being very faithful in representing Gawain as failing majorly in this text, and that's quite cool.
All right, Junius, I'm gonna jump in real quick. Matt, thanks for joining us today. Wish you all the best.
Take care, Matt.
It's been a pleasure. And take care, everyone.
All right.
Take care.
Farewell. So hopefully I didn't cut off too much of your thought there on Gawain. It sounded like that might have been the final point there. I don't know. I don't know if I got to the end of it. I got to the end of it. Yep.
That's a great point, Junius. That helps me. I didn't take time to pause and think about it, but everything you just shared really opens up that image for me. I kind of just like, and then moved on. So thank you for that.
Well, and Gawain is really the great hero of the Welsh part of the branch of the Arthurian tradition, whereas Lancelot's the French. And they both seem to inhabit these different roles, where Mallory ends up bringing them together is literally a clash. And I'm curious to see if Malcolm goes in this direction. But you've got the greatest knight of the Welsh tradition, who is, as part of the Round Table, is really supposed to be like one among equals. And yet in Mallory, Gawain ends up corrupting corrupting Arthur and trying to get him to make his decisions on the basis of kinship and his responsibility to his blood family, rather than his responsibility as king to his knights. And I don't think we get too much glimpse of that, but I saw every now and then Gawain being really self-motivated in ways that we don't see, like in the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight text, but ways we do see in Mallory. And I'm like I said, I hope Malcolm brings some more of that out, because he is one of the greatest knights, but he doesn't have the same like selflessness that we see in the code of chivalry to the same degree that we see in Lancelot.
One passage we probably should talk about is the end. I don't know if you're ready for that, Josh,
Sure.
but I can introduce.
Please
So
do.
you have the and I love the way that it brings the poem to a sense of height, because as I've said a couple of times, there is this constant double vision created by one, as a reader, for me, all the rich allusions, the echoes of the John Tread, all these echoes. And then you have also the way it's structured creates a kind of counterpoint or polyphonic form. Because remember, Lancelot rides off from his encounter with Galahad 3 times.
Yeah.
We see that event 3 times. It's really beautifully structured, I think. So it creates this sense of a weaving in and out, the way that a theme will be introduced in a symphony and it'll go away and then it'll come back and it'll echo another theme. So some beautiful kind of double vision echoing going on all throughout. And then at this final scene, as the Grail is unveiled, he uses the 3 knights. So he's like, how can I describe the beatific vision, right? Which is the great perennial problem for the poet. You have Dante at the pinnacle trying to describe the beatific vision. And even though it is admirable and it is excellent, I can't help but feel like you can't. There's always, right? And so here's Guite trying to, as a poet, deal with that problem, a vision of the Grail, the beatific vision. And he says, how will I deal with it? I'll kind of bring in concentrate this polyphonic vision. Here's what Bors saw. Here's what Galahad saw. Here's what Percival saw. And it really is another nod to Tolkien, right? To Tolkien and his Mythopoeia. Mythopoeia says, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. So it's almost like that passage becomes Guite's frame for how I'm going to deal with the beatific vision of the Grail. And I just thought that was really successful.
Yes.
So I'll just stop there if y'all have other thoughts on that passage.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is beautiful. And the way in which he breaks all these different perspectives of the mystery. He uses this word a lot. And I think it's well done. Like Nacian is transformed into the incarnated Christ holding up the Grail. And so that's one image. Well, Percival sees the 4 living creatures and the blending of heaven and earth. But that's not what Bors sees. Bors sees every tribe and tongue and nation and language worshiping. And so we've also got these echoes of Revelation again that are coming out, that the Grail becomes in Guite's poem, the Grail becomes the way in which we understand, and this is an exaggeration. This is almost sacrilegious to say so please forgive me. But the Grail becomes almost an interpretive key by which all of the metaphysical elements of Scripture that we see glimpses of in different biblical characters and their stories, it becomes the thing that brings everything together. Yes. That's a big ask to do for a poet.
But that is what it is, right? It is this this sacramental vision caught in an image, right? Yeah. Because you have the procession of the holy objects leading up to the climax of the Grail, but with this polyphonic, multi-perspective approach, I think he's trying to highlight the way that, every cup we drink is an image of the cup, the chalice through which Christ gives us, renewed life and joy. Every plate is a paten by which, God feeds us. All lights are lamps through which Christ's light shine. All wood is a fragment of the cross. All streams are flowing down from the font of our baptism. And so all of our experiences, all nations, all tongues, all tribes, all these images gathered into this moment of the revelation of the Grail is just supremely successful, I think.
And that culminates in the epilogue that Guite writes, where he says, the Holy Grail may come to us on any Sabbath day.
Yeah.
So when we take the Eucharist, we are participating in the mystery.
Yeah.
We are experiencing in not a sensory way like the Grail is. The Grail is very sensory, but we're experiencing a metaphysical reality when we take the body and blood of Christ. We are living out the Holy Grail. I love that. I thought this was a beautiful way to end the poem.
I don't know if you have a thought, Junius, but I want to read this little line because it's another nod. It's one of these allusions. It's one of these echoes to George Herbert. Did y'all pick this up? So Percival, when he sees the Grail, the moment he removed the veil, I saw the chalice shine. Through silver, it seemed clear as glass, and through it, I saw all things pass. I mean, that's Herbert's elixir, right? That Christ is the elixir, the philosopher's stone. And he uses this metaphor of like a glass that I can see through it, or if I turn my eye espy, right? It's either a mirror or a window into the vision of Christ. So that's just another example of how I just want to go back and read through it very slowly and like make an annotated version, right? It deserves an annotated version because of all of the threads from English literature that he's pulling together to create the vision.
I read through this over about 3 weeks, and I decided about 10 pages in that I was not going to make any notes. I was not going to highlight. I was not going to write a review of this for some magazine or website that would pay me money for it. I just wanted to experience this poem. I didn't want to utilize this poem. And so I don't have nearly as many notes as you do, Annie. I don't have it marked up the way, but I want to go back and do that markup because I think it's a poem that I think will merit return and study.
I don't have many notes either. I think you're right, Josh. You need to first just go into the story, plunge yourself into the story, just experience the story.
I want to back up to the comment you made about those images. I think it's really interesting that. I mean, you go to scripture, you get these different depictions of God, right? I mean, Moses got to see God's back. Adam and Eve experienced the Logos walking in the garden. Ezekiel has all these not conflicting, but hard to understand images. Then you get John's revelation. Well, and Guite's answer to that is yes, all of those at the same time. And I think it's a really interesting I think it's the sense of the holiness as a different reality that is breaking in, and the sense of the Grail as the Grail, in as much as the Grail is the container for the Eucharist, that it is the Eucharist, it is a mysterious connection where Christ himself mediates the holy and the mundane, and that those meet together in the moment of the Grail. And so that mystery is not one that we can analyze. We can't didactically present it per se. And then, at least in Guite's presentation, like you might see a fragment of it, but the four of us might catch 4 different glimpses, and all of them are true because the mystery is that profound and it's that complex. I'm still stuck thinking about that. I think it's just a fabulous way of articulating the depth and beauty of the nature of God that I think Guite gives us a sense of that complexity through his poetry.
Yeah, so I will say I think you can analyze it, and I think you see a lot of really good analysis of it in scholastic theology, and I think that Guite is actually availing himself of some of that. One of the things that's really important about one of the ways scholastics will talk about the crucifixion is that when Longinus pierces Christ's side with the spear and water and blood flow out, they say that's baptism and that's Eucharist. And that's meant to be a kind of synecdoche for all of the sacraments. And so it is not just that the crucifixion is ground zero for the sacraments, but even particularly the piercing of the side with the spear. And of course, the Grail tradition that we're following here combines the cup of the Last Supper with the other Grail that Joseph used to catch the blood and water that flowed from Christ's side. So now you have the institution of the Lord's Supper joined to the font of the sacrament that flowed from his side and baptism. This is the point in the poem where you want it to be really, really medieval, right? And I think Guy did a really good job of leaning into that. I don't know what Malcolm's theology of the Eucharist is, but it's quite clear to me that the text's theology of the Eucharist is transubstantiative. And that is true to the tradition. And there's a poetic power there that is really beautiful. And it's such that it's patient of, you could say, you know, well, I mean, Christ is really present, whatever that means. We don't need to get into the metaphysics of it. But I think I like that he avails himself of the types of language that medieval theologians use, and that the Caisse de Saint Grail uses when talking of the Eucharist with that transubstantiation, which is, you know, still really new technology at the time that the Caisse was written in, you know, 1225 or so.
Sure.
I think that's really, really good how he brings that into place. But the other aspect of it that's super medieval that I really love is the combination of two things that the medievals were really inspired by and fascinated with. The first is pageantry, and the second is the liturgy. And of course, they both overlap in the liturgical procession. And so, you know, I think the primary note in the Grail procession is that of the liturgical entrance at the beginning of the service. But I like, and also the procession around the table once the host has been sanctified. But I also think that a secondary undertone to that is that the pageant, where you're portraying this parade of virtues or vices or whatever the thing happens to be. And so I think that rightly, this part of the poem, when the Grail shows up and is achieved, is the most medieval part of the poem. And I think that that's really, really cool that he was able to pull that off. And in many ways, this picture that we've already talked about that Stephen did on page 302 with the Christ representing all those different realms overlapping is also kind of the most medieval of all the pictures. I mean, you look up and you see the mountain there with the tree of life at top. So that brings to mind Mount Purgatory, atop which in Dante sits the earthly paradise, and all of these other sorts of things. It's very well laid out. So I think that both artists who were involved in this section of the text really nailed it. And I was really pleased with the language got thicker at this point in the poem, and the imagery got thicker, and I thought that was really, really good. The one thing that I thought was a little bit of a missed opportunity was he says that each of the knights see as much as they can see, and which is wonderful. And then he describes what Bors sees and what Percival sees, and then he says Galahad saw everything the other two saw, and he saw something more. And I kind of wanted Galahad to be a third voice in the symphony rather than summing up everyone else and then seeing more than them. However, having said that, what Guite did is more medieval than what I wanted. So
yeah. And I think I'll speak for myself. I hope so. You notice he included the words of the Anglican. So he's Anglican. The Anglican liturgy. Gosh, I can't find it right now, but Christ be with you and also with you, kind of thing. So, which by including in language from the Book of Common Prayer, from a liturgy that hopefully, you know, somebody's experienced at some point, that pageantry, that mystery, that polyphonic vision will begin to enchant our experience of our Sunday Eucharist. You know, that would be my hope for people reading this, is that the wonder and the beauty of this lyrical, mysterious, delightful medieval tale, the meaning, the beauty, the goodness you see in that tale is trying to tell you, should become present to you when you process, when you participate in the pageant. That would help people have eyes to see, you know, beyond the veil, and to begin to use that overused term, re-enchant their own experience of communion. I hope that people walk away from the book with that experience.
The right sort of re-enchantment. I mean, that's a Christian sense of re-enchantment that sees God actively at work redeeming his fallen creation. Well, those are wonderful thoughts. I want to ask one last question about the book, and then we'll kind of wrap up with one question for each of you. But we've said a lot of things over the last 2 hours and 15 minutes about what this book has done. I want to see if we, as we close, think through for just a moment about what exactly has Guite accomplished in Volume 1, with the idea that this is not the finish. This is the beginning. Hopefully, if the Lord tarries and gives Malcolm long years. He's got 3 more volumes to come out with, for a total of 12 books and 4 volumes. But what has he accomplished here? I'll take the first go as on that one. But I think there's 2 things that strike me as happening in this volume that I think are just I'm really excited about. The first of those is an Arthurian story that is not Disneyfied, but is thoroughly accessible to a wide reading public. This is not The Sword and the Stone. This is not Merlin singing Liberty Gibbets and dancing, but it's really accessible. And I think it's faithful, but I also think it's artful. This is a new rendition. It reminds me of the line at the beginning of the Odyssey, "Sing the tale again in our time," and the invocation of the muse. I think Malcolm is doing that again. And it's the other thing that strikes me as significant here has been throughout our conversation. Matt brought this up earlier, and I meant to try and get it in, so I'll get it in here. There is something about the Arthurian tradition that straddles the pop culture world and the scholarly world. They're the folks who just love Monty Python and the Holy Grail and the Black Knight having all his limbs chopped off. What are you gonna do? Bleed on me? They too have a claim to just really loving these stories. But there's also the scholarly side that really wants to dig into the sources and study the medieval French and be able to trace the evolution of the tales. And I think Malcolm straddles those two camps really, really well. So I think that's quite the accomplishment to be able to. I mean, I thought his essay, the first appendix that really surveys all his sources, is a great summary. I mean, that's not to say he did kind of. You don't need to also read all the text in Serena Higgins' collection, but you kind of don't if you read Malcolm's essay. It's like a shortened version of that. You've got all the text referenced there, and you can get a really good scholarly summation. But it's also just supremely, supremely accessible. So, other thoughts? What does this volume accomplish?
I mean, I think we've been saying this in various ways already, but probably the most important thing is to draw us back to the Christian tradition that is deeply embedded in the Arthurian story, and simultaneously the poetic tradition. If people are going to pick up good art again, it's only because we're producing good art. And because that has been harder and harder to access in the last 150 years, the reclamation of good art that is also Christian is imperative for any kind of cultural renewal. So beyond just the enjoyment of the story itself, I think leaning into both of those traditions is really paramount.
Yeah, I think, recovery of the Christian tradition, recovery of poetry, those are the same thing, because it's in poetry that we most truly perceive that sacramental tradition, that the heavens declare the glory of God, that the world is charged with the grandeur of God, that this physical world is made to be a meaningful expression of spiritual truths. And it's the poets that help us see. It's the poets that help us read the meaning of the rose, the meaning of the albatross, the meaning of the tree. And so to recover the Christian tradition, to recover a true sacramental vision will require the recovery of poetry, right? And so to combine with that, I think, Lewis said quite straightforwardly, if we don't recover the tradition of chivalry, our world is ruined. We will fall back into violent barbarism. We have to recover chivalry, which is also part of that Christian tradition. For the knight, right, is the fusion, the gathering of courage and in battle with real self-sacrificing virtue. And so I feel like you have all of that in this poem. You have the sacramental vision, the recovery of poetry for the common person, and the casting of vision for the beauty of chivalry. And that's why, for me, it does feel like this kind of catastrophic turn at that dark hour where I just feel like we're back, baby. Like this thing sold out, right? Like that's amazing. So, I think,
#1 on Amazon. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really amazing.
Which tells you how much people are starving for it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I consider he's achieved a lot of things, and I agree with most of what you guys have said, and I won't repeat them. I'll just add one more thing that I think is really, really important. He's achieved a proof of concept. To reach #1 on Amazon with a long form ballad about a medieval epic is something that was a non-starter for a lot of publishers before he did it and showed that it could be done. And so what I'm interested in is the fact that this poem makes possible the rest of Merlin's Isle. And so now we have the door is open for him to complete a an epic, for a truly modern epic in poetry. I think that Annie said earlier, the Lord of the Rings is sort of the epic of the 20th century. I agree. And that's what Tolkien was setting out to do, was to write a narrative. He talks about that in the letter quoted at the beginning of the Silmarillion, second edition, to write an epic that could, tie together the British. We don't have our own story in England because the Arthurian stuff, the French took it from us, and we're kind of stuck without our own national tale. And maybe my story can kind of be that in some sort of a way. And then, but we don't have that in poetry in the same way. And the things that we do have that are good contenders for that, like the Fairy Queen, suffer from being both incomplete and too abstruse for most folks to get into. And so the combination of accessibility, of contemporaneity, even while it is shot through with archaisms and with learned references and these sorts of things, and is taking us back to the roots of that story that has shown for the past 1,500 years that it has the power to transform itself into any culture, even the English culture, who were the original bad guys of the story, right? And they can say, this is our national hero too. I think that's to be able to bring all of that together in a book that can hit #1 on Amazon is a mighty wonderful achievement. And I'm most excited about what it makes possible, even as I'm very excited about what he's done as well.
Oh, I love that. Well, guys, this has been a wonderful conversation. We've had a pretty steady audience over live stream this whole time. So I want to close with just giving you each an opportunity to talk about your whatever next projects you have on your horizon that you're excited about, that you can talk about. I'm sure we all have things we're like, nope, can't talk about that one publicly yet. But literally whatever you have coming up next that you want people to know about, tell us about it.
Well, I'm working on a collection of Lenten sonnets, kind of in the spirit of John Donne's Holy Sonnets. This is a lyrical sequence that follows a speaker into the wilderness, drawing on the temptations of Christ, sayings of the Desert Fathers, even my own sort of personal experiences, to create a picture of gradual, often painful, picture of sanctification through suffering, with like occasional pictures of mystical delight too. So not quite as ambitious a project as Guite's is. But to kind of round out with Easter verses and kind of this vision of hope.
Beautiful.
Cool.
I'm going to be doing a summer sabbatical. So take a break. And I think this inspired me too, of a reading sabbatical. Like, you have a lot of output, and it's really important to take a break and make sure that your spirit stays connected, that you stay fed and stoked. So I'm just going to do a reading summer, but then in the fall, I am excited to be leading the C.S. Lewis certificate for the Logos Institute. So if you've enjoyed chatting about King Arthur with me, go sign up at Logos and then come read and discuss C.S. Lewis with me in the fall.
Nice. I'm so excited you're going to have that time to take that break. I've got a course starting on Saturday on Lewis's Cosmic Trilogy, the Ransom Trilogy, and we're also going to be reading The Dark Tower as part of that, which I'm just super excited about, because I've been reading, just finished reading all this Arthurian stuff, and I just taught a theology course on the theology of angels and demons, which is quite relevant to the Ransom Trilogy, and I've been working on a scholarly article on the philosophy of time in The Dark Tower. So I've got all these things that I am just ready to go to town on. So that's going to be exciting. If that sounds good to you, go over to academics.juniusjohnson.com and sign up. We start Saturday morning. And then it was mentioned earlier, but next spring, starting in January next year, I'm going to be teaching the second half of the Arthurian tradition. So we're going to start with Marie de France and Gawain and the Green Knight. We're going to do Mallory. We're going to do Tennyson and T.H. White. And also we're going to end with Tolkien's Fall of Arthur, which I think is a really fascinating transposition of this tale into a sort of Norse poetic context. It's very analogous to what Malcolm's doing, except that he did very, very little of it, and has a different sensitivity going into it. So if you want to read the sources that we keep referring back to in their entirety and have a chance to talk about them in the context of the larger medieval milieu, you can check out the King Arthur course that will be starting in January of 2027.
Marvelous. And I've spent the last 13 years working for various teams inside the Thales Academy and most lately Thales College Universe. And From now in about 28 days, I will be launching into a new quasi unknown. I'm going to be doing kind of two things. I'll be the curriculum program manager for the Rafiki Foundation. The Rafiki Foundation runs 10 classical Christian schools as part of their Rafiki villages in 10 countries in Africa. And I get to be part of elevating their curriculum to the next level and helping connect people that want to know how do we use that curriculum in our stateside schools here in the U.S. So I'm very excited about that. But then I'll also be taking the helm at the newest project from the Ciceronian Society that also sponsored today's podcast, the Logos Institute for Classical Liberal Studies. We want to be the place where teachers who are trying to gain the knowledge and insights for the classical tradition that really every classical school and classical curriculum asks teachers to provide to students. We want to be a place where teachers get that because we keep referring to, we live in a certain moment where our culture is really in the wasteland to the extent that that our culture exists. But we're trying to make a recovery. And to do that, we need teachers who actually know the sources, know the books, and have had the conversations that really feed the soul and foster great ideas before they're in the classroom, responsible for bringing students into that tradition. So Logos is a way that teachers can really get that formation without leaving the classroom, because as much as I just said we ought to have it beforehand, most of us are in the trenches teaching and realize that we actually need that formation, but can't leave the classroom to go to grad school. So we need something different. And that's really what the Logos Institute is trying to do. So I'm very excited about seeing what we can build with that institution. And as Malcolm said about 2 hours ago, there is Lewis's image of Logos in that hideous strength is just absolutely beautiful. And it's something that we draw on as the Logos Institute. We want to be a place where people are recovering these very human habits that allow them to flourish and to spread flourishing to others. Well, Josh, Junius, Annie, our absent Matt and Malcolm, I just want to thank you all for joining me here today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for
Josh.
having us.
Awesome.
Well, and thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us here today on this Optimistic Curmudgeon live stream event. So my guests today are Annie Crawford, Dr. Joshua Fullman, Dr. Junius Johnson, Matthew Wheeler, and the unexpected Reverend Dr. Malcolm Guite. Our thanks to the Logos Institute for Classical Liberal Studies for sponsoring this episode. Until next time, love the good, seek the true, and enjoy the beautiful.